Hi there. In the last two videos, we looked at what's happening in 2022 in terms of the price for grains and oilseeds and what's happening to prices of farm inputs. Today, we're taking a bit of a different tack and we're going to what's happening to feed demand from the cattle and feed sector and from the dairy sector. To kick us off is Angus Gidley-Baird, Senior Animal Proteins Analyst. How are you doing, Angus?
Very well, thanks, Dennis.
And how do you see the cattle and feed sector changing their demand for grain this year?
Yeah, from a numbers point of view, we're expecting the cattle on feed numbers to actually increase through the course of 2022. This is reflective of the general rebuild in the herd, plus ongoing strong demand in the market. We saw them bottom out sort of the late 2020, early 2021. Since basically halfway through last year, we've started to see numbers pick up again. 1.11 or 1.12 million head on feed in Q3 last year. It was an 11% increase on the same time in 2020. And as general numbers of cattle start to increase, we're expecting those numbers of cattle on feed to follow the same trend through the course of the year.
And how do you see the demand for grain-fed beef going this year? And based on that, how is that going to impact the margins of lot feeders?
Yeah, look, we've seen very healthy prices for grain-fed beef for two reasons. One, we've got domestic supermarkets that are keen to keep supply on the shelves and they are continuing to push numbers through the system. And also we've got some very strong export markets as well. About half of our grain-fed beef is consumed here and half sent overseas, with Japan being our major grain-fed beef export market. Import prices for Japan at the moment, beef prices going into Japan at the moment are at some of the highest levels we've seen in the last 5 years. So that's reflective of some strong demand out there. That is helping overcome some of these high prices and supporting feedlotters' margins. And obviously ongoing availability of grain and the prices they've got should mean that we expect that feedlotter demand to remain strong through the course of 2022.
Well, that's good to hear. And now let's switch to the dairy sector, which is also a critical sector in terms of the domestic demand for grain. Mick, what do you see on your end? How is the dairy sector going to impact the demand for grain this year?
Yeah, it certainly looks like it'll be a buoyant outlook for feed demand from the local dairy sector. And some of that comes down to the simple fact that there's good profitability at farm gate level for dairy farmers operating in Australia. And we certainly see that good profitability continuing through 2022. So that'll close out the current season by mid-year, and then we get underway for the new production season. But all in all, it's still going to be a profitable outlook for 2022. And of course, that's underpinned by an elevated milk pricing environment that we've got right now, largely coming back to, a very firm global market for dairy commodities, but also just generally, favourable trading conditions for dairy farmers. So when you've got good profitability on farm, it can and does lead to increased supplementary feeding from dairy farm businesses here in Australia. But it's worthwhile mentioning, though, Dennis, there's some local factors to consider that will potentially hold back feed demand to some degree. Firstly, dairy farm operators are going to have good feed reserves on farm after a good season last year, and an outlook for, a decent season ahead in terms of homegrown feed. So that can limit the amount of supplementary feed that they need. And of course, it's a bit more of a structural issue where we're still seeing quite a lot of farm consolidation, which is obviously meaning less farm businesses operating in the industry. And of course, for the ones that are still operating in the industry, labour is a real challenge for operators, as it is for a lot of food and agri enterprise, but that's really holding back, some expansion plans from some of the dairy operators, just because they're not quite sure if they want to go and get bigger and need more feed, whether they've got the labour to run that bigger unit. So there are some forces that'll hold back feed demand, but all in all, just a buoyant outlook for feed demand from the sector because it's enjoying good profitability.
Thanks, Mick. Well, there's some good news there. I hope you enjoyed this video looking at cattle on feed and the dairy sector and how they may influence the grains market this year. Thanks for being on here, Mick.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, see you next time.